Joining us now to discuss the 2020 presidential race is Marc Lotter, the Director of Strategic Communications for the 2020 Trump campaign. Marc, when we look at the idea that the Trump campaign is adding more staffers, different people to place around the country in order to get kind of a grassroots type of campaign thing going once again, is that a promising sign that once we're past this hump of the pandemic, once we can go back to some degree of normal campaigning, that the Trump campaign's on a good starting track?
Well, what I'll tell you, Alex, is that's actually building on the huge advantage we've already had. We've had people on the ground in the battleground states for more than a year already. And so what this latest addition is just even more manpower. And what I have been told by state chairmen in state after state after state is they have never seen this level of support, both in staff and financially, from a presidential campaign in their histories. And that's because we're setting new records. We've registered more voters this year than we did in all of 2016 already. And we're not done yet. So when you look at the real things that matter in winning an election, we are absolutely swamping the Democrats. And I saw a Democrat party in one of the states actually say it's disturbing what they're seeing the Republicans doing already.
And you know, I heard similar things such as that during the primary season when a lot of people were focusing on the Democratic candidates. But I heard a lot of people in the early states also saying that it's a good thing that the Trump campaign was holding, or I'm sorry, the RNC was holding these primary for the president as well, because that was an opportunity to get people out, get people voting and registered in that effort, and to getting them just out talking about the president, even though it's not something that was necessarily a competitive race. I believe maybe Joe Walsh was still in at the time or anything, but that's to say that people were coming out, people were at least getting involved early on and registering, for that matter, too, as compared to just the Democrats who were turning out for the primaries. So looking ahead to 2020, what's different about this race than 2016?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that we've had this huge advantage of time. Where the Democrats are just now obviously settling on their candidate. They're still not hiring people. There are states where they don't have people in place already. We've had that in place for a year, and we've been building the machine. And what you saw in the primaries, I mean, it wasn't about winning the primary. We already know we won the primary. Right. These are practice runs. These are preseason games for us to try to see where our people are. Where do we need to do a little more work? Where do we know that we've got so much excitement and momentum? How can we better capture that? And so we have all of that experience. Meanwhile, I mean, you've got the Democrats on the other side. They're still trying to build this thing with duct tape because they were already bad in 2016. They have not closed the gap with us in 2020. And if anything, they have fallen even further behind.
And when it comes to the issues, too, it's very interesting. It's a different type of playing field than it was in 2016. And right now, the Biden campaign is using this idea of racial tensions to kind of draw the contrast between what he would propose as a president and what the president is doing. But I remember during 2016, a lot of people saying, let them talk about race. We'll talk about things that people actually care about, things that a lot of voters think actually exist and affect them, such as the economy, such as immigration, trade, things of that nature. Is that still existent here today?
Well, to a certain extent, but what I would tell you is that we shouldn't be afraid to talk about race either, because when Joe Biden calls police the enemy of the people and he supports efforts with the radicals to defund the police, not as only is he making non-minority communities less safe, he's making minority communities less safe as well. When he sides with the teachers union and says that he would shut down school choice and force primarily poverty-stricken students coming from mainly communities of color, force them into failing schools based on their zip code. That's wrong. And that's what Joe Biden supports. And even when he talks about keeping schools shut down right now, that's not hurting kids in affluent communities. That's hurting kids in low-income communities, many communities of color, because they don't have the access to the internet, to the iPads and the laptops, and they're not as able to distance learn as easily as others, let alone the fact that so many of those kids are reliant on school lunch programs and on additional tutoring and other services. He's hurting so many low-income communities because of his horrible policies.
No,
and they know it.
that's an excellent point, because when you take away police, it's always the rich and the wealthy who will have their own private security. When you take away a child's ability to go to school, it's always going to be the more affluent families who are able to hire tutors, get online type of courses, still provide breakfast and lunch for their kids, whereas in many inner cities, that's the first meal a lot of those kids get is their school lunch. So taking away those opportunities from them is disproportionately affecting the very people that he claims to be helping when it comes to many of these issues. But these are the type of contrast that won't even come out necessarily until we get to debate, the two people going head to head. And we see a lot of people covering for the Biden administration right now saying, well, maybe there should be conditions on this debate before it takes place. What does that tell you about the prospect of a potential debate?
They understand how weak and feeble that Joe Biden is, that they are trying to erect rules and try to create new expectations so they don't have to have him debate. Look, the last thing Democrats want is Joe Biden on a stage with Donald Trump, because, I mean, this is a guy who couldn't remember the year of 9/11, thought he was negotiating with leaders who've been dead for decades. The guy's barely keeping it together there, can't even read the teleprompter of his own plan. So they can't put him on stage with Donald Trump. And so they're trying to create this expectation, trying to set the stage for the fact that they're not going to debate Donald Trump, because they know that if people see both of them on stage, they're the loser in that battle.
No, you're exactly right. And it's kind of funny now that nobody's talking about this in the media necessarily, but every reasonable person that you talk to on the street, even Democrats, even progressives, will tell you that exact thing. They are very much so worried about those debates. And I think that's why we're seeing at least an initial effort to set the stage of maybe not having debates, at least not as many or as long or something like that. I think we're going to start seeing that coming from the Biden campaign in the near future. But Marc Lotter, I appreciate you coming on tonight. Thank you.